Try one more time, and I was asking. Sir.
It's great in theory. You got Enron, you have the stock bubble, you have the housing crisis, you have poor kids who can't get educated. How does government solve these problems for us?
Enron only mostly works.
Not on the head again. I mean, what's your answer to that one? That's the question. How do you deal with all these issues?
Well, I didn't say government should do nothing. It's a long way from healthcare should be free for everyone to we shouldn't prosecute Enron. My first job out of graduate school was working for the U.S. Federal Trade Commission on antitrust law. Enron was working under government contract on supposedly deregulated energy markets on a lot of the money that it made and stole. So it's perfectly fine for me to have a regulatory state as an umpire. What I'm objecting to is having government get out of the umpire clothes and play. They're the ones coming up to bat. So what you named was education. I'm willing to admit that that's a government function. The question is, y'all are all at a private school. Question is, should government provide education or should government assist in funding education? If you think there's a problem with people who can't afford to go to school, why not use my program of vouchers and let parents choose the school and the curriculum that their kids are going to go to? They want their kids to go to a religious school, they want their kids to go to a secular school. They can't. Instead of a one-size-fits-all publicly provided monopoly. So there's two different questions about education. One is funding and the other is provision. We're stuck, as I see it, in public provision. I don't see the reason for that. If you want to say education is the means by which people begin to climb the stairway to the American dream, I agree. And government may well have a role in that. I don't oppose that. Now, you had a long list. I think I only took up two.
No, the housing bubble and the stock. People left of their own accord or something going to do things like that.
You don't really want to bring up the housing bubble, do you? Which was caused by Freddie Mac.
Personally, I don't.
So you want to bring up something that was clearly caused by federal agencies acting in a way that created moral hazard by saying, do whatever you want, we're the lender of last resort. I agree, government should have gotten the hell out of that. That would have solved it. So, regulatory state, provide education, I think that may well be part of the minimal state. I thought the drink thing, I got all excited, but he drove past me for the basket. Yes?
How did the change in the Interstate Commerce Clause come about that it became an excuse to regulate just about anything instead of actual commerce between the states?
It means neither more nor less that he who has the opposite position is mistaken. So in order for the federal government to be able to regulate the lives of people who don't know as much as they do, you have to expand the scope of what's ours as opposed to what's just mine. So the erosion of the Commerce Clause, I think in microcosm, is the erosion of the 9th and 10th Amendments. The expansion of federal power at the expense of the power of the states and the expense of rights that are actually held by the people. So the Commerce Clause is just part of that. But it's not illogical. If you look at the line of cases, and you look at the elastic clause which says that the federal government has all the powers that are necessary proper to carry into being all the powers listed above. But the consequences of that as an increment are that I own 35 acres of forest land in Chatham County. It's a pine forest. Go hunting there some. There's a mud hole. I'm certain that if the EPA knew about that mud hole, that would be a regulated wetland. Under the Federal Commerce Clause, because if it rains enough, that water will flow into a river. And that's navigable. So the definition of navigable under the Commerce Clause is, if I put my big old foot in it and it gets wet, that's navigable waterway. Because that water flows into a river. And so that's the means by which the federal government can control private property in that water that might never otherwise leave a state. Because in North Carolina, it's going to flow to our ocean. So I think that's inexorable. It's unavoidable, provided we don't say, stop, that's something that's not in the Constitution that the government should be doing. That's not an activity that's specifically listed. And it gets elided, it gets chipped away. So after a while, you can look at it and say, well, that doesn't make any sense. But none of the individual steps did anybody say anything about. And here I said I wasn't going to answer so long. Darn it, I'm sorry.
Would you support the elimination of term limits to help regulate emissions?
Term limits are a hard question. I mean, on the one hand, why shouldn't we be able to keep the people that we want? And the answer a lot of people give is that there's too much money in politics and too many interest groups. I testified in the U.S. Congress and the U.S. Senate against the passage of McCain-Feingold. I mentioned I was from Duke, and they passed it anyway. It was very upsetting. McCain-Feingold says that the way to get money out of politics is to prevent people from using their own free speech on TV, in magazines, in newspapers, as a way of defending this attack on their own property. I think the reason that there's so much money in politics is that people are trying to defend their property and their persons against what they see as incursions by government. So if you think that there's a problem of too much money in politics, then the solution is not term limits, and it's not campaign finance reform, it's government reform to limit the scope of government action. So all that by way of long action. We wouldn't be talking about this if government weren't so powerful. So if you say term limits, that'll reduce the power of government. I think what that would do is increase the power of congressional staff. Committee staffs and individual staff members who work, they're the professionals, the professional bureaucrats who were never elected by anyone and are completely unaccountable, will condescendingly say to the new member of the House of Representatives who's there on a one-term term limit, well, you don't understand, that's not how we do things. It's going to take you a while to break in, I understand, but France, Japan, in many cases, those legislative staff very nearly rule policy areas. We have committee chairs. It's not clear to me that it's better, but at least they have to stand for re-election. So I think term limits are a good solution to a problem that doesn't actually exist. The solution is, let's reduce the scope of government to those things that are the minimal state. Is there one other before I follow up? All right.
Just to add to that, former colleague of mine, Gary Wolfram, who's very well connected up in politics, finds that the term limits is actually increased, especially with the fact because they're the ones who write all the bills now for the legislature.
So it takes you a while to understand.
Yeah.
So I understand the sentiment. Because it used to be that it was so awful to be in office because people actually wanted to make money on their own. They had jobs and lives. They wanted to get back to them. Now that is their job. That is their life. We've lost sight of what's important. So I understand why people think that the term limits make sense, but I think that that's at best like a third of a step, and it may go in the wrong direction.